I've had a weird fascination with that Metavision eye thingy ever since it first appeared in the Manchester match. And I don't mean the pattern in the pupils of Metavision users that have already fueled tons of fan speculation. Rather, I'm interested in that strange entity that floats above Isagi when he uses his Metavision. And the more I've scrutinized it, the more I've realized that it's part of an absolutely mind-boggling network of metaphors and associations that really brings everything in the Manchester match together. In particular, there are 3 series of metaphors that inform this storyline as a whole: sight, the divine, and celestial bodies. So what I want to do here is tie all of this together with the match's major themes and show how the Manchester match is more than just a sum of its parts. And I guarantee that by the end of this video, the floating Metavision eye will make so much more sense as well. Hello, my name is Sean, and today I've come to talk about gods. So, on a structural level, the second match in the Neo-Egoist League essentially focuses on 3 character arcs. First, we've got protagonist Yoichi Isagi's efforts to close the gap between himself and the NEL's main antagonist, Michael Kaiser. Secondly, there's the story of Isagi's teammate, Kenyu Yukimiya, who struggles to distinguish himself within his new team. Also, on a side note, I've somehow been convinced that this guy is called Yukimiya for ages, and I've definitely used that moniker in earlier videos. Yeah, I sure felt like an absolute moron once I realized my mistake. Then we've got the arc of Seishiro Nagi and Reo Mikage as they navigate Manchester's football philosophy and their complicated relationship with each other. And over the course of the match, all of these storylines intersect and inform each other in really tantalizing ways. On the structural level, the entire match revolves around the conflict between Isagi and Yukimiya. This starts when Yukimiya confronts Isagi after his assist in their previous match against Barcelona. Yukimiya berates Isagi for making a compromise rather than aiming for a goal himself. In his view, Isagi hasn't lived up to their lofty ambition of becoming the world's best striker. This dispute, however, comes full circle at the climax of the Manchester match. This time, Isagi passes to Yukimiya, and with that, Yukimiya surpasses everyone on the playing field and scores the winning goal. This entire storyline is underpinned by what is arguably the match's most important motif, that of sight. As we learn heading into the NEL's second match, Yukimiya suffers from an eyesight condition that threatens to turn him blind. For that reason, there's a dark cloud hanging over him at all times. Yukimiya is acutely aware that his dream of becoming a professional world-class striker could fade away at any moment. And on a symbolic level, Yukimiya's physical condition gives rise to a figurative blindness as well. As Isagi puts it, Yukimiya's uncompromising pursuit of his dream causes him to lose sight of reality. Or to put it differently, the immense pressure on Yukimiya to become a world-class striker before it's too late makes him narrow his field of vision even further. The manga flags the blurring boundaries, and that pun was very much intended, between the figurative and the literal from the start of this storyline. Right after his clash with Isagi, we see Yukimiya's vision going black. The same thing happens again towards the end of the Manchester match. Yukimiya's sight seems to be getting blurry, and this leads him to attempt a shot even though he has no realistic chance of scoring. Over the course of this match, Yukimiya's desperate delusions are put in sharp relief with Isagi's rational, challenge-centered mindset. From the very start, Isagi sets Michael Kaiser as his target and scrutinizes his rival's every move. By doing so, he discovers the secret to Kaiser's success. Kaiser uses his peripheral vision to process more information than anyone else, an ability that Isagi dubs Metavision. So with this, the contrast between Yukimiya and Isagi is consolidated through the match's central symbolism. Where Yukimiya is losing sight of reality, Isagi's field of vision expands to greater heights than ever before. And interestingly enough, the dynamic between Isagi and Yukimiya is paralleled on the Manchester side as well. Ryoma Chigiri experiences tremendous growth by analyzing and reconfiguring his scoring formula. Just like Isagi, Chigiri has formulated an ideal and actively works to attain it. And on the flip side, there's Nagi and Reo, who abandon their original plan to grow in favor of chasing after a fleeting dream. Kinpachi Ego explicitly compares Yukimiya's delusional shot to Nagi's miracle goal in the same match. In both cases, the striker might have given an impressive showing, but they reap no long-term benefits from their efforts. After all, they were aiming for a goal that could never be reliably reproduced. So with all this, one of the most important themes of the Manchester match is what path different players take to the top. Some chart out a feasible roadmap for their growth, whereas others are at risk of succumbing to blind fantasies. This brings us to the religious dimension of the conflict between Isagi and Yukimiya. One of the most striking aspects of Metavision is that its users are basically likened to divine entities. When Isagi figures out Metavision, he views it as a quasi-divine perspective that would turn him into a god on the playing field. That's also how other players perceive him. When Isagi outwits his rivals with his Metavision and protagonist sense, he appears like a virtual god. And on the other end, Yukimiya has started to cope with his illness through a belief in divine providence. In his eyes, God only metes out trials that one can overcome. And that very much includes his own condition. Now, while it's great that spirituality gave him the strength to keep moving forward, this belief has a devastating impact on his football prospects. When Yukimiya first tries to score, he's operating on blind faith without the skills to back it up. In essence, Yukimiya is asking God for the kind of miracle goal that Isagi and Ego have both dismissed. All of this comes to a head in the moment where Isagi completely surpasses Yukimiya. Right there, Yukimiya sees God before his very eyes. And that god is Yoichi Isagi. I've already talked about how the manga establishes a parallel between Yukimiya and the Nagi-Reo duo. In that light, I can't help but be reminded of one of the most crucial scenes in the second selection. The one where Isagi points out that Reo falls short because Reo wants to be chosen rather than doing the choosing himself. Blue Lock basically presents the same kind of opposition between Yukimiya and Isagi. Yukimiya is looking at God to guide him through his tribulations, whereas Isagi has set his sights on godhood itself. This also explains why Isagi is able to redeem Yukimiya at the very end of the match. After sinking his teammate into the depths of despair, the god Isagi indeed hands him a trial that he can overcome. Yet, the Manchester match complicates Isagi's godlike status as well. The first sign comes towards the end of the game, when Isagi becomes acutely aware of his physical shortcomings. So then, Bayern's coach Noel Noah teams up with him. But by doing so, Noah also drags his new protege back down to Earth. He reminds Isagi that he's not, in fact, a god. And then there's the very climax of the match, where Isagi passes for Yukimiya. Now that Yukimiya has seen God for what he is, he understands that his previous worldview was short-sighted. And so, with his final shot, he no longer entrusts his fate to God. But that's when an unexpected final trial appears. As it turns out, Gioele actually grasped Isagi's plan. So, in the final moment, BM only ekes out a victory because Yukimiya exceeds Isagi's calculations. Because Yukimiya surpassed God. That's what makes the aftermath of this match so cathartic as well. After his decisive goal, Yukimiya gets an offer that includes world-class treatment for his condition. So symbolically, Yukimiya figuratively opens his eyes to reality, and as a result, he's promised a cure for his literal blindness. Now, I want to turn to what is a much more understated element of this match's symbolism, its astral imagery. The Manchester match marks Isagi's debut in BM's starting lineup, and he also receives a helper in Ranse Kurona. So when this duo links up for the first time, Isagi compares Kurona to a moon that revolves around him. And so, them passing back and forth is dubbed the orbital resonance. Now let's have a look at the implications of this metaphor. When Isagi compares Kurona to a moon in orbit around a planet, he implicitly posits an egocentric hierarchy between the two of them. At this point in the match, Isagi views himself as the main celestial body and believes that the others on the field revolve around him. For what it's worth, that's a nuance that I feel is lacking in the name Planetary Hotline from the fan translation. So on this front at least, I do really prefer the official release. It's arguably due to this very assumption that Isagi fails to score when he first discovers Metavision. But after Isagi has another confrontation with Yukimiya, he finally understands the flaw of his earlier perspective. All this time, he wasn't the only egoist who saw himself as the protagonist of his own story. Now, on a visual level, this realization is depicted through a shot of the Earth from space. On the one hand, this stunning spread illustrates Blulok's conceit that, on a fundamental level, everyone believes that the world revolves around them. But at the same time, the artwork proves that very point by picking up the imagery from Isagi and Kurona's orbital resonance. It's as if the manga is telling us that we'd already seen this in practice all along. And to use an astronomical metaphor of my own, you could say that this spread demarcates the moment where Isagi transitions from a geocentric to a heliocentric football philosophy. Instead of seeing himself as the center of the universe, he starts operating under the assumption that he's simply one celestial body within a massive solar system. Up to this point, I've discussed 3 key sets of symbols that the Manchester match has brought to the fore: their sight, divinity, and celestial bodies. Now, you might have already realized that there are at least loose associations between these 3 domains. After all, in many religions, gods are all-seeing entities that created the entire universe and everything within. And so, it makes sense that Isagi initially surpasses Yukimiya on each of these fronts. At the peak of his ability, Isagi becomes an almost omniscient god who understands the order of the cosmos. Yukimiya, on the other hand, is blinded by the belief that God will make the universe revolve around him. At the very end of the match, it's only by rejecting God, that is, by surpassing Isagi, that he overcomes his fate. This finally brings me to the Metavision glow that I've been wanting to decode all this time. In my view, this is the locus where all of the match's symbols come together in perfect harmony. The workings of Metavision are represented by this eerie entity peering down from a higher dimension. Now, on the most basic level, it of course resembles a massive eyeball, a symbol of Metavision's ability to take in an unprecedented amount of visual data. But at the same time, its shape and the way it hovers above the playing field also invite comparison to a moon or a planet. And that really feeds into the match's astral symbolism. This visualization essentially suggests that Metavision is orbiting around a larger celestial body. So in that light, it's no wonder that Isagi falls short as long as he views himself as the center of the universe. After all, such a worldview goes against the very nature of Metavision. Moreover, the manga portrays the Metavision orb as a kind of divine entity. It looms above the playing field, viewing all the players as its pawns. So when Isagi taps into the power of Metavision, he too must treat himself as nothing but a single piece on the game board. But more than that, the floating eyeball to me calls to mind a very specific Christian symbol, namely the Eye of Providence. In the tradition of Christian art, God is regularly depicted as an all-seeing eye, often surrounded by a triangle that represents the Trinity. Here, for instance, is an image from the 17th century textbook Orbi Sensualium Pictus. It depicts God in the form of an eye in the sky, protecting humanity from the devil's snares. Perhaps most famously, though, the Eye of Providence appears on the Great Seal of the United States, and thereby on every single dollar bill. In short, the floating eye actually alludes to the Judeo-Christian God himself, and Metavision users thereby figure as vessels of God by association. But yet, I swear that I've come across something that resembles the Metavision orb even more closely. I've been racking my brain for ages to figure out what that might be. So, if you've got any great ideas, please let me know in the comments and help me out of my misery. And if you liked what you saw, consider subscribing for more in-depth Blue Lock analysis every other week. I hope to see you again soon.